What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. Assuming they stay healthy, is this version of the Nuggets unstoppable? I can't see anyone left beating them in a 7-game series. So I've been really impressed by Denver, and I do think that their offense is unstoppable in the sense that, like, over the last 3 games, they have an offensive rating over 127. And we're talking about a Minnesota Timberwolves team that not only was the best defense in the league in the regular season, was clearly the best defense in the league through the first 6 playoff games, and is literally constructed by a former Denver executive to be tailor-made to beat the Denver Nuggets, right? And they sure as hell can't stop them. Like, you know, there's been a lot of talk about Rudy Gobert after last night's game. And, like, do I think Rudy Gobert deserves all 4 Defensive Player of the Year? Not necessarily. I don't think he's the best defensive player in the league. And I think he's got a deeply entrenched media backing that kind of gives him a lot of a leg up when it comes to reward season. But I do think he's a top 5-ish defensive player in the league. And it's more just fascinating that Rudy Gobert was targeting him simply from the standpoint of Jokic's greatness. That for him, he's thinking, oh, that guy that's the best defensive player in the world, I'd rather attack him on an island because then I don't have to worry about him in help, and I know that I can go through him whenever I want. And so that's more of a testament to Jokic than anything else. But I do think that Denver clearly demonstrated that they can score on anybody. Now, here's the thing. The Lakers and the Timberwolves gave the Nuggets issues for different reasons, right? The Lakers gave the Nuggets issues because they have incredible interior passing, LeBron James and Anthony Davis and Rui Hachimura cutting along the baseline, rolling to the basket and ball screens, LeBron going downhill, D'Lo and Austin is spacing shooters. They have so much offensive firepower in their starting lineup. Remember, that team was second or third in offense for the last half of the season, if I remember correctly. So, like, that was an elite offense. But their issue was they didn't have the personnel to contain Jamal Murray. And so they constantly ended up dealing with problems late in games with getting stops on Jamal Murray. So Denver was able to overcome that matchup by being like, oh, that's great that you guys are so good offensively, but we're better offensively, right? The Minnesota series was different because Minnesota, it's like they've got excellent perimeter defenders. Instead of Austin Reeves on Jamal Murray, now it's Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards, and they have given him hell in this series for the most part, right? Jokic, it's like wave after wave of size. Like, the Lakers did not have a too big look. Minnesota does, right? Minnesota's got these kind of big, trunky power forward center hybrids that they put in front of Gobert. And so there's like this layered approach to their defense that really gave Denver some problems. But the way that Denver was able to regain control of that series is Minnesota's offense sucks. And so as soon as Denver really engaged themselves defensively, they were able to grind that Minnesota offense into the ground, right? This is where Boston is unique. Boston has both the perimeter talent to make life more difficult on Jamal Murray, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Reggie Jackson, and Michael Porter Jr., while also having and I'm talking about the defensive end, while also having the super high-powered offense on the other end. Now, the counterpoint is Kristaps Porzingis and Al Horford can't guard Nikola Jokic. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That's going to be a disaster. But the way the flip side there is, if Minnesota can't stop them, like, what advantage is there really? Because if Jokic and Murray in that offense are going to rip through Minnesota's defense to the tune of 127-something points per 100 possessions, then it really doesn't matter what defensive personnel Minnesota has, especially when they go over to the other end and Minnesota can't score. And so Boston, I actually think, has the capability to get into a shootout with Denver and win. Now, I will be picking Denver to win that series. I think they are more consistently at their ceiling, and I think they are the safe bet. I believe Denver's going to win the championship, but I do not think this is just over. I think Boston has a really good chance. I think Boston, specifically one of the things with Boston, we talked about the high drop coverage that they've been using against Anthony Edwards, right? Did a whole video breakdown on it today. Jokic did an amazing job in Game 5. At the level of the screen, containing Anthony Edwards, using active hands to force turnovers. He just had a great defensive game. He's been great defensively for the last 3 games. But the problem there is you can take the ball out of Anthony Edwards' hands because there's just no offensive talent around him, especially when Mike Conley's not out there. It's like, oh, you went with a high drop against Ant, or you double teamed Ant on an ISO and you got the ball out of his hands. That's great. Well, off the ball, I have Rudy Gobert, who can barely catch and finish, can't read the floor, is just an absolute disaster offensively. Karl-Anthony Towns, who, like, yeah, if he's making his three-point shot, it can get going offensively, but Aaron Gordon has basically contained him on the drive. Gilgeous-Alexander Walker, who's really streaky, and Jaden McDaniels, who's been bad offensively through this entire postseason run, right? So, like, they just don't have offensive talent off of Anthony Edwards to capitalize on those aggressive coverages. If Denver goes with similar coverages, and I actually think Denver will probably run more deep drop against Boston, and we'll get into that more if those two teams actually advance to the finals. But in the event that they run more aggressive coverages and load up, Jason Tatum is one of the best skip passers in the league, and he's not passing to limited offensive players. He's passing to really high-level offensive players that can all shoot. And so Boston, I think, is actually uniquely equipped to score on Denver and also make things somewhat more difficult for them on the defensive end. Again, I will be picking Denver, but it's going to be close. I think it's going to be a great series, and I do think that Boston certainly presents a lot of challenges for Denver. By the way, Boston shot like shit in both of the regular season games against Denver, and they were still right there in both of those games. So, again, picking Denver, but don't write off Boston. I absolutely think they can win that series. And I do not think this is over. And that's how it should be. I want it to be difficult. That's the best part about adversity in NBA history. You want to see what Jokic can do against that next level of that challenge. And I'm glad it's going to be in the finals. And by the way, neither team is there. Denver still has to get past Oklahoma City, Dallas, and obviously Boston still has to get past New York, Indiana. I just expect them to. Those of you guys who have listened to the show, I've been on Boston, Denver in the finals basically the entire season. All right. Hey, Jason, love the show. In Mavs OKC, both stars performed, both teams decent from three, but the difference is the use of the bigs. Chet needs the ball more. Do you agree? So it's tough because with the way that Dallas is loading up on ball screens, particularly at the rim and at the point of attack and in ISO, there's not really a ton of opportunity for Chet to score on the roll because there's a lot of congestion in there. So most of it comes down to Chet needs to be operating in advantage situations more, and that's not going to happen unless those kick-out passes were happening. And again, like I talked about earlier, Oklahoma City just hasn't done a very good job of taking advantage of those kick-out opportunities. How do the Mavs get Kyrie going? So Kyrie is both teams have really good perimeter defenders, right? It's been difficult for everybody. Luka and Shea have managed to break out a little bit because they're both, top 6 or 7 players in the NBA. Depending on where you want to rank Shea, I think Luka's the second best player in the NBA, right? I think we'll take a look at it in the offseason, but I think saying Shea's top 5 is not, completely out of the realm of reality, right? Like he's, I want to see how the rest of the postseason goes before I do those rankings, but those are two really, really, really good players. And so they've managed to break out in a couple of games, but they've also had bad games, right? Like I thought Shea was pretty bad in game 2 and game 3. I think game 3 in particular, I think he was like 10 for 23 from the field and was really struggling to knock down those mid-range jumpers, right? Luka was a disaster in game 4, right? Like a lot of this is just Lou Dort's awesome at defense. Jalen Williams, Kason Wallace, these guys are awesome at defense. Derek Jones Jr., PJ Washington, the rim protection. Chet Holmgren has been amazing defensively in the series. I saw a crazy stat today. I don't know if it actually survived tonight. I'll have to check real quick. But I saw a stat that Chet has won his shifts in every single game this year in the playoffs. That's crazy. Let's see if he did it again tonight. -10. So Chet lost his shift tonight, his shifts for the first time in the entire postseason. So like both of these teams are really strong at the point of attack and really strong at the rim. But yeah, as far as Kyrie goes, like I actually think Kyrie has done a really nice job of just doing what he can to help winning. Like tonight, even just there's a huge 3 he hit off of a ball screen to put them up 14. I think it was in the early fourth quarter, if I remember correctly. And it's like he's not getting great looks, but he's just finding a way to make shots in timely moments. Kyrie's playmaking has been a huge asset to the series. Kyrie's been excellent defensively in this series. I'm sure you Mavs fans would agree, but like, yeah, Kyrie needs to get going offensively if you're going to like beat Denver in the next round. There's no doubt. But like credit Oklahoma City, and Kyrie's just finding other ways to impact winning. Well, the Nuggets beat the 2022 Warriors. I think the Nuggets are the best team in the league that I've seen in the NBA since the KD Steph Warriors. So I do think they'd beat the 2022 Warriors. Again, that's not a discredit to the 2022 Warriors as a championship team. They're a bona fide championship winning team, but so much of that was Steph just overcoming everything for his team. And that team, a bunch of key guys overachieved, particularly Jordan Poole and Andrew Wiggins. But in terms of like sheer force of power and size, I do think that that Denver was better. This version of Denver is better. But again, like I think Denver's going to repeat this year. So like the last team to repeat was the KD Steph Warriors. Before that, it had been almost 6 years or so earlier that it was the LeBron James Heat, right? And before that, it was the Lakers. Like, it happens really rarely in NBA history. And so if Denver can pull that off, that's impressive. Not to mention that I think the league is just freaking stacked with talent right now. So a repeat championship would be a really special accomplishment. How much does the Kristaps Porzingis injury impact the Celtics title chances, in your opinion? Obviously, I think they need him to beat Denver, but you've got 3 weeks until Denver. So I don't think it matters all that much, just simply because I think he's going to be healthy when the time comes. But yeah, if Kristaps Porzingis gets hurt or gets re-injured along the way, that just makes it difficult because Denver's just a really damn good team, and I think you need all hands on deck for it. Let's see. Who is more valuable to the Nuggets, Murray or Gordon? To me, it seems Gordon is the more valuable player. He anchors the defense and has many outstanding offensive traits. Couple things. Murray is, again, I from the standpoint of process, you can't talk about Murray's injury. He just needs to find a way to be better, like we've talked about. But he obviously is a little bit hampered, and a lot of it is matchup based, right? Like, this is a series that Denver has dominated on the interior. Jamal Murray was never going to be the way you beat Minnesota. Minnesota's perimeter defenders are too good, right? And honestly, like, I thought he got pretty good looks against the Lakers. He just was cold, and then he got hot at the right times. And like every single time they needed Jamal Murray in the Lakers series, he showed up and he made shots. I do think that overall it's very close between those two guys, but I think I'd lean very slightly towards Jamal Murray. But every single one of those players in that starting lineup is pretty close in terms of impact. Like, can't write off Michael Porter Jr. He was unbelievable, especially through the first 6 playoff games this year. Minnesota's been way more keyed in on him over the last few games, but he's hit some big shots too. I think Michael Porter Jr., especially as a help defender and rebounder, he brings a lot to the table. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is the guy you're asking to guard the other team's best perimeter player every night. So you got to give him some credit there too. And he hit a bunch of huge threes in game 5. So I think all those guys are vitally important. But if I had to pick a true number 2, even though Aaron Gordon's having a magnificent playoff run, I think I still lean slightly towards Jamal Murray. Let's see. I'll do two more, then we'll get out of here. Does Dallas match up well with Denver or Minnesota? So I think Denver's going to win, so I'll talk about it more from the Dallas-Denver perspective. Obviously, we'll confront it from Minnesota's perspective if they happen to flip the script and win the last 2 games. But the thing with Dallas, again, it's going to be a big part of it is going to be Luka. I think you're going to see similar types of coverages from the standpoint of Denver, kind of being up at the level, and Jokic, specifically Luka, has that gift, like we talked about earlier, of manipulating the back line of the defense. But a big advantage there is they have the Aaron Gordon piece. So what a huge luxury to have Aaron Gordon if you do run into a KD, if you do run into a LeBron, if you do run into a Kawhi, if you do run into a Luka, that you can put him on a big forward from the other team. And I think Aaron Gordon is a guy that's going to have some size and quickness to make things somewhat difficult on Luka Doncic. I think Dallas will be able to score in that series. But similarly to what we talked about earlier, I think that the front line for Denver would do a ton of damage. I think it'll. I'm going to say exactly what I said after the Lakers series. I thought Minnesota had a similar type of chance to beat Denver because they were so bad offensively, right? Dallas, I actually think, kind of brings a better combination of offensive ability and defensive ability. I do think that they'll compete with Denver, but I just think overall it's the same kind of story we've been talking about. They're a really good offense, but they're not as good offensively as Denver. They're a really good defense, but Denver's as good, if not better, defensively. Denver was top 10 defense this year. So again, I think Dallas will compete, but I'd be picking Denver. And we'll get into the nitty gritty of that series if it ends up coming to fruition. Let's see. Ooh, we got a Star Wars one. So I'll do one more basketball question and then we'll do a Star Wars question. For the Wolves, would you trade Cat for a reliable perimeter initiator guard that can score slash playmake like a Kyrie DeJounte archetype next to Ant? Yes. The idea is the ideal situation. You want a really good skill guard next to Ant. Ant's your athlete guard. You want a skill guard. Just think like a kind of like a bigger, better version of Mike Conley, right? I still like Jaden McDaniels at the 3, but I think you need a really high level offensive player, especially as a shooter at the 2 in that case. Karl-Anthony Towns gives you the means with which to make that type of deal because he has value around the league and you have a redundancy there. You have Naz Reid. And you have to kind of look at it from the standpoint of luxury. Doesn't matter how much depth you have if your top 5 is not good enough. And so I do think that the best option moving forward for Minnesota is to trade Karl-Anthony Towns. You got to wait to see who becomes available this summer. DeJounte Murray is actually an interesting type of player in the sense that he can kind of take some more of the primary point of attack assignments to save Ant's legs. DeJounte just had his best perimeter shooting season of his career. It also gives you another offensive creator that can create dribble penetration, which is something nobody else on that team can do but Ant. Like Cat can't beat people off the dribble. Mike Conley can't beat people off the dribble. So like DeJounte's kind of an interesting kind of guy to look at. Also, if I'm Atlanta, I'd be really interested in Karl-Anthony Towns as a partner alongside Jalen Johnson and Trae Young. So that might actually be an interesting route for them to look at. What is your favorite Star Wars movie from the first 2 trilogies? This is an interesting one. I think I'm going to go with Revenge of the Sith. And the reason why is like I have always been super fascinated by the history of the Sith. Those of you guys who don't know, I'm a diehard Star Wars fan, but I'm particularly big on fantasy. Really like Star Wars, really like Game of Thrones, really like Lord of the Rings. I have a podcast that I do with my buddy Luke. It's called Two Sons. You can actually see the logo down here. We just recently hit like the Shogun series. We hit Fallout. Really, really loved Fallout. Don't know how many of you guys were into that video game growing up, but that was an incredible one for me. But we actually just did a big breakdown on the Acolyte trilogy, or the Acolyte trailer, I should say. And in that trailer, there were some Easter eggs that really kind of lead me to believe that show has a lot more to do with kind of flushing out some of the history of the Sith. I got super Paul just messaged me and said, "Are the Twitter rumors true that you love episode 9 and applauded in the theater when Palpatine returned?" I'll get to that in a minute. I have a story. But anyway, the Acolyte, I think, is going to be about some of the history of the Siths, particularly surrounding how the Jedi discover the rule of 2. It's kind of like a big plot hole in Star Wars. I won't get into it right now because if you want to listen to that, you can go to my other podcast to see it. But some of my favorite Star Wars books are like the Darth Bane trilogy, which explains the actual origination of the rule of 2. And then also this book called Darth Plagueis, which Darth Plagueis effectively kind of functions as a what's the word I'm looking for, as a precursor. I'm blanking on the obvious word for movie that comes before the actual series. Paul, you could probably text it to me, but it's a precursor to the Phantom Menace, right? Prequel. Thank you. It's a prequel, basically functions as a prequel to the Phantom Menace. And in it just goes into excruciating detail of like where, there's a Sith Lord named Darth Tenebrous who had an apprentice named Darth Plagueis who ended up finding Palpatine. And it intricately lays out what's called the Sith Grand Plan. And basically, the Sith used to be thousands, right? And then 1,000 years before the Phantom Menace, there was this big war with the Brotherhood of Darkness. The Jedi won, partially through manipulation of Darth Bane, which you can read in those books. But from there, the Sith started to realize they can't win against the Jedi because they don't have the teamwork ability to be able to come together and reach a common goal. The Sith all backstab each other because they all want to be the Dark Lord of the Sith, right? And so they come up with this system called the Rule of 2, where there's always one master, one apprentice, and it just kind of allows them to operate in hiding. But the major theme is they are trying to secretly subvert the galaxy. They obviously conceptualize and come up with the Clone War. They obviously they create the clone army. They do all of this stuff, right? And it all comes to fruition in Revenge of the Sith. And so every time I watch Revenge of the Sith, I always just think back to the Bane books and the Plagueis books. And I just think about specifically like this genius grand plan that obviously George Lucas conceptualized, but that the Sith came up with. And it kind of all comes together in that particular movie. So of all the prequel trilogy, I think I would say Revenge of the Sith is my favorite. But again, I've done deep dive summaries and reviews of all those books I just mentioned, and basically every piece of Star Wars content on my Two Sons podcast with my buddy Luke. I'm also going to be doing every episode of The Acolyte when it comes out, which is less than a month from now. So make sure you guys head over there and subscribe to that channel so you guys can see some of that content in the future. All right, guys, let's call it a night. We're just going to run a breakout of the mailbag tomorrow morning. So there will be some content tomorrow morning between the other segments we did tonight. But I'm not going to do a show, like a new show in the morning. I'll just see you guys after the final buzzer of Nuggets Wolves tomorrow night. I think Denver's going to go in there and win and complete the gangster sweep. But we will see what happens, and I will see you guys live on YouTube tomorrow night.